Hey guys, how you doing today? It's nighttime out, right? So you're gonna see a lot of this over this video, right? If you can't handle seeing my face in the dark from time to time, maybe this video is not for you. I don't know how long this video is gonna be because it's actually gonna be dealing with a really uh, dense and complicated situation. And I was gonna wait until tomorrow, but I knew if I tried to do that, I'd be up all night spinning this one in my head. And it's especially piercing me because I've had several conversations now with people online about it. And several of them have, let's say, thrown shade towards my credibility as a YouTube creator and commentator. And frankly, I'm just not going to let that stand. I'm excellent at what I do. I consider myself top drawer. And I know that I'm going to be successful doing this as long as I keep doing it. And so I don't see... the gauntlet has been thrown, let's put it that way. And so I shall rise to the challenge. What's the subject of today's topic? Halifax Pride, which is a very well organized and very strong pride community, has severed ties with their public library system because of the public library's refusal to ban a book by Abigail Shrier entitled Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Now, it's very obvious from the title of this book that it is a transphobic rant, mainly. I even had the pleasure, inspired by these conversations, of seeking out an online copy of this book and giving it a read. It takes no time at all because it's so poorly written and so badly articulated that it's... And frankly, Abigail Shrier is so blazingly stupid that it's shocking that it has reached the notoriety that it has. Which I'll get into that as we go down this conversation. I'd like to break this into three distinct parts. Part one is a review of this book. Part two will be speaking about the events from the perspective of the Halifax library system. Why did they not ban this book? And then three, the tactic of book banning by Pride generally. So, the review. Abigail Shrier is obviously stupid, right? Her book contains no evidence, it contains no facts. It is a series of anecdotal stories that are derived from the conclusion that she presents at the beginning of the book, in the title itself, that what we are experiencing is a quote-unquote transgender craze. She postulates in the introduction of the book, almost in the first page of the book, there didn't used to be all of these transgender people around, and now suddenly there's a whole lot of transgender people around. And because Abigail is so stupid and bigoted in her worldview, she concludes that the issue must be the internet. This is the same kind of bogeyman scapegoating that we have seen people do towards television, rock and roll, video games, marijuana. It's not different at all. And instead of doing a deep analysis of the society that she lives in, because she's too bigoted and stupid to do that, she decides to write a book which fearmongers and tailors to the lowest possible common denominator in the society, while pretending to be coming forth in good faith. In short terms, she is a con artist. She understands that this issue has a lot of interest, that there are a lot of people who are interested in learning more about the subject, and a lot of people who are interested in learning more in good faith in the subject. And so she has inserted herself here in order to sell books, because she is obviously a hack and an idiot. And it is as simple as this. Abigail, the reason why it appeared to be that there were no trans people in the society, and then suddenly there were a whole lot of trans people in the society, is because as early as a generation ago, we were beating the fuck out of trans people. Do you understand, Abigail? You dumb, dumb bitch. If a person in the 80s even, or 90s even, stood up and said that they were trans, that perhaps they were a man who would want to be a woman, or a woman who wanted to be a man, someone would beat the fuck out of them. That person would get lynched. You understand, Abigail, then, why other trans people, especially in a pre-internet era, who in small communities may be isolated, who in small communities may not have anybody else to reach out to and communicate, not even their own families, why they might want to simply give up the cause of being trans and attempt to blend in to a society who beats the shit out of trans people. You dumb idiot, Abigail. And so because she is illiterate, obviously, about even the most basic element of the history of trans people in her own society, which is so mean-spirited that it has to be called intentional, right? That her book descends into incoherency and total nonsense. It's a series of anecdotes in which she throws shade, essentially, while completely not understanding whatsoever that she is engendering an entire, a complete and total fear in the trans community. Because if you're trans, you understand fairly intrinsically that this whole not getting the shit kicked out of you for being trans fad that's going on right now is fleeting and fragile. You understand that there are people lurking in the darkness directly behind people like Abigail, holding pipe wrenches and nooses. You understand that that's the truth. And so when someone like Abigail shows up, the response from the trans community and their allies is fear, anger, passion, and a strong desire to purge from our society such literature. This desire is itself completely understandable. I also would love to live in a society where it's completely fine to be the person who you want to be, right? I will go so far to say that I think it's completely acceptable for a person to be whatever person they want to be, regardless of anyone else's opinion. It seems almost meaningless to me what the opinion of somebody like Abigail Shrier is, that the opinion of this individual about who they are matters an infinite amount more than Abigail's opinion in all regards. And because Abigail is completely ignoring the basic history of what it is to be a trans person in North American society, she completely discredits herself in the first few pages of her own book. And so, if you are illiterate in that regard, if you don't know anything about the subject, and if you're as stupid as she is, she's a very stupid person, obviously, then you come up with the most idiotic explanations for why it is the case that there are suddenly all these trans people around, when the truth of the situation is that These trans people were always there, Abigail. We were just beating the shit out of them. And now we do it slightly less. And so now a whole generation of children are coming into the world, and there's the same amount of trans people in this generation as there were in the last. It's just that we don't beat the shit out of them because we've learned a few things from the gay and lesbian community, right? We've learned a few things. We've opened our hearts a little bit, and I do mean a little bit, to the idea that perhaps we don't have as firm a grip on what sexuality and gender is in our society as we like to think we do. Perhaps we don't have as firm a grip on these concepts. Perhaps things are a lot more liquid than we actually believe, Abigail. And so when these young people come into the world and they have this feeling that perhaps they are a boy in a girl's body, that when they articulate this, it is done safely, or safer at the very least, and there aren't people who are going to beat them up for it. There aren't people who are going to kill them for it. And so what troubles people like Abigail is that these formerly invisibilized people by the violence of our culture are now showing up. And she can't deal with that concept and refuses to acknowledge the extreme violence that we have perpetrated against that community in the first place. And so the fear and the passion and the hatred and the angst that is coming out of the transgender community towards her book, which can only be described as an illiterate transphobic person's opinion of transsexuality, is completely warranted and completely understandable. And so now this takes us into Halifax Pride and their request to the Halifax Public Library system to ban this book, followed up with the rejection of the banning of that book, followed up with the disconnecting, the separation of Halifax Pride from the library system. I've even seen some people say that the Halifax library system is transphobic itself. So the role of the library system is to maintain an open discourse and an open society, that it is not there to censor. There are extremely rare cases where censorship is deemed appropriate, but it is rarely the case that the library system moves forward with this. And I am genuinely of the opinion that seeking a ban on a book, even a book as stupid as this one, is simply a bad strategy that fails. If you haven't figured it out, I try very hard to be an ally to trans people, and I'm trying very hard to make myself as clear as I possibly can. Book bans fail because they don't work. They are a bad strategy because they don't actually work. When you seek a book ban, your enemies, and trans people have enemies, big eye opener if you don't think so, trans people have enemies. Trans enemies will latch on to a book ban attempt and use it as a way to shift the discourse in their favor. They will they will turn it into a freedom of speech issue instead of obviously a transphobic issue. They will move the target off of them as the spreaders of obvious transphobic information that is plain and obvious to see to anyone who even looks at this book for a moment and has even a tiny bit of sympathy in their hearts. And it hands to the enemies of the trans society the method to defeat them, which is this shifting of discourse. That instead of the trans community and the allies saying, look, this book is disgusting, it has no information, it is simply transphobic, even in the title, and it most definitely ignores even the most basic history of the trans movement. Instead of focusing on that conversation and holding the book up as evidence of a continued attempt by segments of the society to oppress and suppress trans people, instead of the conversation revolving around that, we get to no longer speak about the contents of the book. That Abigail's writings become no longer necessary to focus on by the enemies of trans people. And instead, the conversation shifts to one about speech rights. And it allows the enemies of trans people to sway the opinion of otherwise ignorant centrists and liberals to sympathy for the bigots instead of sympathy for the trans people. And in the case of Halifax Pride, they have allowed their passions, their rightfully meant passions, incidentally. They are on the side of righteousness and truth, without a doubt. But they have allowed their passions to overwhelm their senses and have taken this request to a conclusion that the phrase is cuts off their nose to spite their face. That by severing ties with the Halifax libraries, they have lost in their struggle a major ally. And the librarians and the libraries are a major ally. They have resources that are made available, and they have sympathy from a union and from government workers. And so severing ties because of the library's refusal to ban a book, which the librarians of Canada are well known for fighting in order to not have books banned. They are well known for fighting to keep the society open and to keep information open. And by severing this tie, Halifax Pride damages themselves, strengthens their enemies, and hands their enemies the very narrative required to go after the trans community the most effectively. That now, instead of holding up a book that is freely available and saying, look at the monstrous stuff that has come out of this segment of the society, and instead of line by line and page by page and word by word dismantling this cruel text that has come from an illiterate, privileged white woman, instead of doing that, they have put themselves into a position where now the enemies of the trans community can simply say, well, this is authoritarianism. We don't need to tolerate this kind of behavior. And most importantly, we do not need to talk about the content of Abigail's book. We do not need to discuss it. We can have a completely different conversation about a completely different issue. And what are you not discussing? Abigail's disgusting tract. You're not discussing its contents, you're not discussing what's inside of it, and you're not thrusting it into the faces of your enemies and forcing them to respond to it. By simply demanding that there is a ban en masse of this particular text, you have martyred it. You have elevated it in the discourse. More people will read that book now that this ban has led to this separation of these two groups. More people, simply out of curiosity, will read this text. It will become more notorious, more infamous, more widespread. Instead of being used as a cudgel to berate your enemies, to berate the enemies of the trans community, it is now being held up as a beacon of free speech by the enemies of the trans community. And instead of Halifax Pride having a disagreement with one of their allies and then moving forward with that ally, once the disagreement is resolved, they have now weakened their own organization and taken the conversation away from what's most important, which is that the trans community is a special community, that trans people are beautiful people who have a lot to offer to our society and a lot of wisdom and a new perspective that we should freely allow them to speak and be in our society. And instead of us having those sorts of conversations, we're now caught up in the political drama of a book ban. And it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. It strengthens the enemies of the trans community. It allows them to deflect. And it allows them to change the conversation from, look at this transphobic, illiterate nonsense that was written by an obvious boob, to, wow, the trans community sure is authoritarian. It's a complete failure, and I lament it. I hope that Halifax Pride will pick up those pieces and find a way to re-ally themselves with the libraries. My heart goes to them and the struggles that they're facing. Yeah. Under these circumstances, guys, you are doing really wonderfully. We live in a society that is really coming to terms with what happens when you stop beating the hell out of your own citizens. What happens if you stop beating the hell out of each other? And we're starting to realize that the world that we live in is far more complex and difficult than we previously imagined. And my hope is that we will come to a place where we realize how wonderful that is. You are a divine being standing on divine energy. The world around you wants to uplift you and it wants to support you. And we should support trans people. And people like Abigail have always popped up in the conversation. And instead of making them infamous by attempting to outright ban them, we should admonish their work openly and in public and allow their text to stand as an embarrassment not only to them, but to the worldview that they represent. All right, that's the end of this video, guys. Please like, please share, please subscribe. All the bells, all the whistles. I do a live stream every weekday, 6 to 9. Yeah, I hope you're doing well out there. I know you are. As I said before, you are a divine being standing on divine energy. We could use some of it right now. Good luck. We're gonna need it.